Just like most other founders, I was trying to be a perfectionist, but that kind of borderline converts into an OCD about every single thing. And people, beyond the 6 months or 1 year, people start hating it. When I started LogiNext's, obviously did not have any philosophical rules or even any boundaries in terms of what to tell the people. The focus was just to get off the ground, where the focus became people part and employees.
You are telling yourself, I just need to establish PMF. I need to get this company going. In all of this, right? Where your P0 may be to at least just get the business off the ground. How do you manage people? I couldn't do it.
So the first thing we did after raising money was to get like one recruiter and delegate the whole recruitment process to that person. And that was a big disaster. People do not want even you to trust them blindly, right? Yeah. They want your guidance. They want your direction. And that's when I learned this art of trust and verify.
Hi guys, welcome to this fireside chat. Today we have Dhruvil, founder of LogiNext's, and we're going to talk about something that is actually one of my favorite topics. It's a topic that I don't think is talked about enough. We're going to deep dive on hiring, culture, and organization structure as the company scales, right? I think it's something that all of us have to think about. It changes as the company changes. I saw it with my experience building an organization as well. And so we're going to deep dive on many of these topics. But I think the first topic or the sort of first thing I wanted to talk to you about is philosophy, right? So I think when I started my company, I set down these 7 philosophies of what the culture of the organization will look like. I wanted to talk to you about those philosophies. Like what does it mean to you? What is your organization based on? And what does philosophy of culture mean to you?
First of all, thank you for having me, Arjun. Always a pleasure to talk to you. So I remember when I started, I was 26 years old, right? Did not have much of a maturity or experience to even define what values should be as an organization. The focus was just consistently on
And which
survival.
year was this when you started?
This was 2015.
Okay.
My background goes back till 2010 though, which is when I did graduate, did get my graduate degree from Carnegie Mellon in the US. Did a couple of years of work experience at Deloitte. So I kind of knew how a large corporation is designed, but I was a small, cog of the wheel at that time. Did not have a lot of visibility. Of course, was very young. The focus was more customer delivery in my job. When I started LogiNext's, obviously did not have any philosophical rules or even any boundaries in terms of what to tell the people. The focus was just to get off the ground. The focus was very much around survival. But I think quickly in the first 6 months, I learned the lessons in the hard way, where the focus became not only product and customer, but this people part and employees is one of the very important aspects of the journey. And being coming from a large corporation, typically this is a part that most people take it for granted because they see that everything is just working so seamlessly. Yeah. And you don't get to see that whole behind the scene people management part, especially when you're young because you're joined at a younger position in the company as well. In 2015, I remember when I had moved to Mumbai from US, and we had finally made after like 1 month of interviewing from whatever sources we got resumes from, because with little to no brand, it's very difficult to even attract talent, right? So whatever few resumes we got, we decided to interview few of them and released one offer to begin with. The person was willing to join as soon as possible. That was the key USP of that candidate. We got that person to join. The person joined, and on very first day, he realized that when he came, he saw a very empty workspace on the software side. There was no software written whatsoever. We just had a on-paper business plan. And unknowingly, we had given all the hopes and expectations in the wrong way to that candidate, showing that it's going to be the next big thing and we are onto something crazy big. And we thought that creating excitement to candidates is the right thing to do. But when you're early, I think being honest about what state the company is in is very, very important. That was the lesson number 1 learned, because when that person joined, saw there was no other employee, no code written, no customer. These are just a couple of founders sitting in a small room and trying to build something from the scratch. This candidate really got scared, probably also felt cheated. Yeah. By the end of the day, he was gone. So we always joke about it now that we had 100% attrition rate on day 1 at LogiNext's. But that was a very important lesson learned, that you want to make sure that you set the expectations right.
And one thing you said also, and I remember this because I started at a similar time to you and also a similar age. I remember October 2016, I quit my job. I was in a private equity job, and I quit my job to start up at 24. And a lot of like YouTube videos you'd watch and books you'd read, you'd hear about this thing called set the organization culture and do team engagement activities and have mentors for your team. And I was like, I have 4 people in my team. I need to start selling product. These 7 philosophies that I just took from my dad's organization and I put it in the company, right? But when you read all of these things and do all of these things, you're like, in the early stage at least, you are telling yourself, I just need to establish PMF. I need to get this company going. In all of this, right, where your P0 may be to at least just get the business off the ground, how do you manage people? I couldn't do it. For the first 1.5, 2 years, I was like, that's not my P0. So how do you manage in this time? And if you were to look back, what would you have done better other than this one thing that you told me?
And this is a very usual thing that most young founders feel, when I think about it. And most of the founders usually are in their mid-20s or late 20s when they are starting the company for the first time. Or even now these days, many founders are in the early 20s, right? They have never had a corporate job or any other job whatsoever. They're fresh from the school. I think the number one thing, that we did right at that time, which also kind of fell into place, was we were working alongside with the team, right? I think in the beginning, with a team size of less than 10, it is not about managing them. It is about working with them where they are practically your co-founders, because you are literally doing everything from the scratch. You are building your first screen or feature from the scratch. You're having your first customer presentation from the scratch. You are building your website from the scratch. You are probably optimizing and writing blogs and tuning your SEO for the first time, right, from the scratch. And even your HR processes, right, to how to pay them, the payroll things, the taxation, compliance.
You're learning it all together.
Everything is happening and everybody can see it, right? So if you try to manage them, I think that's when it breaks, because that's when the distance starts to occur, where they start treating you either as a founder or the manager or the boss, but at the same time, what you want on contrary is you want them to be their bosses, so that they bring more to the table and replicate with you. The thing that we did not probably do well was spending enough time to give them the right team members. After first 6 months of journey, we did have some early revenue. We also had raised our seed round of roughly $500,000. So we did have enough money in the bank to get these initial, 8 employees that we had so that they are equipped to kind of do more, build more software, sell more software and whatnot. I think at that time we ended up delegating our recruitment task to a recruiter. So the first thing we did after raising money was to get one recruiter and delegated the whole recruitment process to that person. And that was a big disaster. And in hindsight, what we should have done is to consistently spend at least 30 to 40% of founders' time onto hiring. And I think that's one.
And do you still do that?
It has now come down to about 15 to 20%. But I feel that is still less and probably that's not the right thing that I'm still doing. I feel minimum 20% of a founder's time consistently should be in hiring. Now, how the situation has changed is that I'm spending time to explore and network with more people so that I can stumble upon the right CXO relationships. Because now our focus is to kind of do very high senior leadership hiring. And we have never done that so far, right? The senior most people that we ever had is VPs and SVPs. We've had just only a couple of CXOs, and now we want to have 4 more CXOs. We want to have our first CFO. We want to have our first CMO. I've always been the CRO of the company, but now we want to have our first CRO as well. Now, when you're hiring these people, you don't just kind of go in the market and, typically hire an executive search firm and do 4 interviews and get done with it, right? These are, again, your co-founder kind of relationship that you want to build with them. And I strongly believe that co-founders are not hunted or found. Co-founders are somebody you stumble upon, right? You find them in your network, and then you kind of coincidentally build your relationships with them. So that's what I'm trying to do now. I don't know if I should call that whole time into my recruitment time or not, but yeah.
Yeah, and I think you talked about the journey for an organization to scale, and that is a journey where as an organization scales, as revenue scales, as capital comes into the company, as a number of people scales, the way you look at team hiring, structure, and what your sort of P0 should be from a people perspective also changes, right? So let's say, for example, 10 to 20 people, 20 to 50 people, 50 to 100 people, 100 to 200 people, through this journey for you as an organization as well, how do you change the way you think, the way you deal with your team? Because I remember, at least for me, the moment it moved from one office to two office and second office on the same floor, it's just that we ran out of space in that office, things significantly changed. Because then you couldn't just call out to everybody in your team, right?
Right.
And then in the second office, then there were teams, there were managers, there was team leaders, there was friction, because people who didn't have team leaders now had team leaders, they had to have one layer in between. So how do you manage all of that?
I think for me personally, I've gone through a big change in my own management style, because on day one, I had no management style, right? Like I was kind of just learning on the job. I had never even managed a team of 20 in my career before. So 20 was that kind of tipping point where things started to break for me, because till that point it was a family. Then this whole family feeling starts to fade away. Even the people that you attract with a little bit more brand, they actually also come and expect certain structure from you, right? When they join an organization of 20 people versus 2 people or versus 200 now, right? So the people thinking changed. And for me, the biggest learning was being able to trust everybody. I think I was, in the first couple of years, I was just used to seeing everybody around me. I was used to seeing every piece of work being built in front of me. Just like most other founders, I was trying to be a perfectionist. Of course, I was very detail oriented, which is a good trait to have, but that kind of borderline converts into an OCD around every single thing. And people, beyond 6 months or 1 year, people start hating it. And then you realize that, the people who actually enjoyed that OCD is now kind of, getting done with that.
Yeah.
And the new people who are coming after the strength of first 20 employees, they do not want you to have any micromanagement or too much visibility. They want you to trust them. So then I think I remember after that 2 years of kind of a journey hitting roughly 25, 30 employees, after learning such lessons, I immediately moved from very low trust to super high trust, right? Which is also, in hindsight, was wrong, and I'll tell you why. Because I had burnt my hands a couple of times with a couple of team members who I enjoyed working with, but they quit LogiNext's. They left working with us primarily because of this whole, maybe too much of micromanaging kind of a scenario. And that was a reality check for me personally, that what has taken me to a team of 20 doesn't work immediately after that. And I talked and met a few founders in the ecosystem, read a few blogs online and social media philosophy here and there. And I thought, what, I should be trusting everybody. So let's now trust. I immediately started delegating pretty much every single thing.
It's extremes, right?
And just went to another extreme, which is also wrong, because we lost one entire year by letting mistakes happen in front of us while knowing them, but we were just knowingly letting them happen, which was so wrong. And for those 365 days, I was in this delusion that maybe this whole trusting employees is what really works.
Yeah.
And that's how it should be. And maybe people will make mistakes and they will eventually come out of it. But it turns out that people do not want even you to trust them blindly, right? Yeah. They want your guidance. They want your direction. No human being in this world, no professional in the world is interested in working in a directionless or leaderless, free and flexible environment, right? No matter what goes on social media and what a blog would say, that is not the case. And that's when I learned this art of trust and verify, right? So while you want to trust them, you want to make sure that you are consistently, keeping a check with the right metrics so that you know when to guide them. And that has to be converted into a weekly cadence, a monthly cadence, so that you know, and even team members know when this check is happening, in what format this is happening. And that kind of, I think that was at the end of third year, we were about 40, 45 people, roughly $1 million, $2 million in revenue. And I think that is the right sweet spot that I found after a struggle of these, 2 to 3 years to develop a management style.
And I wanted to ask you now 2 specific questions, which are very founder questions, right? Number one, I found it very hard to let go. when you start an organization, you talked about, let's say, setting up the website, doing SEO, putting out the first communication, and most likely you did it yourself. Right? I remember writing the content for my website myself, late night, just writing every word of content.
Wix always works.
And then at some point, you can't do it any longer, right? Because if you do it, the organization won't scale. But I always felt like, oh, I'm letting go. I could have done it better, etc. All of that, right? So the first question I wanted to ask you was, how do you start letting go? And what does it feel like a founder when you start letting go? And then from there, I'll ask you another question about sort of dealing with the team. But let's start with this.
I think the simple answer on how does it feel to let go, it feels very scary on day one, right? Because you feel like you're losing control.
Yeah.
And usually most founders are also overthinkers, I've seen, right? So you end up overthinking around what the consequences of those smaller, mistakes that are happening because you're letting go. You also starts to lose visibility of how things are engineered. For example, when the first sale happens without you, you actually start also losing visibility into how did that sale happen, and probably there were some learnings which could have used to institutionalize, but you just didn't know how it happened, and one of the team members did a great job and closed the customer, and it happens. So I think that was just like fear is the first emotion that I felt. The second one that happens after fear is that you start to after a repetition of that fear, you start to accept it. You reach a point where you are comfortable with not letting certain decisions be taken by yourself. At the same time, there are certain mistakes also keep happening, so you have to kind of still keep a check of how do you reduce these mistakes. So that is the second one. And I think the third one is when you start becoming good at delegating and you start learning the art on when to lose control, when to delegate, when to let go. Because I've also seen that for different kinds of people, the letting go slider is different. Like some people who join you can actually let them go very quickly. Some people have to be let go at a certain point in their career or in the journey or after the experience with you. I think that slider is something that I start to learn in terms of when to let go. That was the third place.
The other thing I wanted to ask you now is when you deal with tough situations, right? As a leader in an organization, whether you're a founder or a CXO or you're a team leader, there are good times and there are bad times, right? There's not going to be a honeymoon period with a team member or a team that lasts forever. And you got to take those tough calls and have those tough conversations, right? I found it tough or very difficult initially to make myself or put myself in those uncomfortable positions. But we were having a discussion before we went on air on direct feedback. Sometimes it's now looked at badly, right? It's something that people are not as comfortable with. But I found at least that it in the long term is the right thing to do, or it's actually beneficial to everyone involved. So how do you deal with those hard conversations, sort of uncomfortable conversations, and what's your approach to them, or how has it changed?
I think the biggest lesson I learned over the years is that directness is good. And I was always direct. I became indirect and became direct again.
And there's a difference between directness and rudeness, right?
I think, and that is the biggest problem with the world that I see today. Most people mix up this directness and rudeness very, very quickly, right? There's this whole woke culture that is kind of, going around the world. And I feel the new generation in the workforce is becoming even more sensitive than the previous one. When I say generation, again, just maybe a 10-year apart kind of in terms of work experience. But I feel that is one largely detrimental thing for the world. I had tried to become indirect for, let's say few months in our third or fourth year of the journey, trying to be a little bit more respectful to people. But I realized that when I was being direct, it was not that I was being disrespectful. In fact, being direct was the right thing to do at that point.
And there is a way to be direct and respectful as well, right?
I think as long as you have the right relationship with the person you're talking to, you will not have to overthink in terms of how much direct to become. For example, when you're with your friends, do you ever feel like being less direct, more direct? When you're with your family, do you ever feel or discuss about, hey, am I too direct or not, right? You know the right boundaries. So at every level in the organization, every manager and team member relationship or within team member relationship also has to be like that. One of the key things that we are honestly still, coaching people on at LogiNext's is how to be direct to each other as well in a respectful manner. most people currently, while they would have great relationship with their managers and they would know that boundaries in terms of giving and taking feedback, both ways. Most people do not really know how to give peer feedback. And I think it's extremely important to learn from your peers also and do the right thing towards your peers as well. For example, a lot of times when engineering team wants to give feedback to sales team in terms of certain commitments that may have happened to a customer, they always shy away from sharing this feedback. They would always sugarcoat it, right? They would write a long email or they would go on CRM and kind of, have like a very beautiful like starting and then kind of will come to the point and then again, ending in a particular text. And I always kind of try to coach people on that this is not really the great use of your time or their time, because in elaborate explanation of things or sugarcoating things, you're actually sometimes missing out on the point. And that ultimately is detrimental for the person you are being direct to. It is waste of your time as well, and is ultimately not good for organizational growth, right? So just by tweaking your confidence levels and building better relationships in like at your peer level and at your above and below, you are doing more justice to yourself, to others, and to the organization.
I want to ask you a question on engagement with team, right? I think there is engagement with team that's in the workplace. That's team meetings, review sessions, feedback sessions, planning for the new year, etc. And then there is stuff that happens outside the office. There's team bonding, there's engagement activities, there's outings, there's sports days, there's offsites. What's your view on this, the importance of this, and how do you manage this?
I think for us, all the team bonding activities, offsites, workations have had the highest ROI as a commercial investment and as a time investment as an organization. I remember we used to, in the first year of our journey in 2015, we used to, probably go to a nearby park or a bar to spend a couple of hours together as a team, because that is the only time or budget that we had. It quickly turned into, overnight picnics to, nearby locations in Mumbai. Let's say to go into Lonavala for an overnight stay, or going to, let's say, Karjat or whatnot. We used to also sometimes, rent these villas in Bombay for a day. So that we can kind of go there, have fun, play games, party hard and come back. It's a kind of good regeneration, good refreshing exercise. Also, people come closer heavily. That quickly converted year on year into plans to go to Goa and then Maldives. And then last week we went to Greece. And every single time now it's become institutionalized, where we have a committee every year, which people have formed, where they come and make plans for the whole year, which are under budget, gives a great ROI in terms of team bonding. And not just team bonding, we also do a lot of learning and development sessions on these trips. Because now these like 2-hour sessions and trips and outings have become like 6-day, 7-day trips and whatnot. So we run sessions around stock options. We run sessions around compounding, right? We run sessions around how to sell effectively yourself and to your customers as well, right? So all these learning and development programs, which typically companies do over a whole year, we actually package it into a
6 days.
6 days, power packed, full of fun, energetic, vacation or outing or offsite as we call it. And whatever money we spend on this one, we get the best ROI on this one. And after this one, people typically come back with even better relationships with their peers, across departments, with their managers, even with the leadership, right? Because that's when even I get a chance to, kind of spend a lot of time
with the rest of the team.
Pretty much everybody, right? And we are still a team of roughly 240, 250. So it is still doable. We feel that up to a strength of 1,000, we should be able to do it. And hopefully after that, we'll change and evolve accordingly. But I think I heavily recommend to everybody in the ecosystem across the world, especially in remote cultures and remote environments. It's extremely important. I've also have a few portfolio founders who are, remote first, who are running remote first organizations, and they have a quarterly cadence around doing these 6-day activities, like a 1-week offsite. They don't have, of course, office space expenses, so they are consistently able to do it every quarter. And they are, they are able to offer that flexibility to all their team members to work from home and yet create that exciting team environment, which typically only in-office cultures have.
Absolutely.
Also, to add to that, I can kind of add one more line there is, while all these exotic locations becomes a theme, and especially it has become a theme for us at least in the last 2-3 years, I always remind everybody in the organization that the last thing we want is to get recognized by these exotic locations, because it will be a very sad workplace for all of you when people are joining this company because we are going to exotic locations, right? So a lot of times what happens, the marketing team and HR teams would kind of jump on such opportunities and market the hell out of this across the ecosystem so that they can kind of attract better talent. I feel that using such mechanisms to attract talent is the last thing any
talent has to come for the company.
Yeah, it has to. Every organization, every founder should know how to communicate, or at least they should communicate transparently to all their current and prospective employees on what to expect and what not to expect. So even if certain things are happening in the organization, if that's not what you want your new employees to start expecting, you have to be extremely clear about it. I think that's one conscious decision that we have taken, and I usually keep on over communicating this message, where the last thing we want is to attract people who are coming here for any perks. There has to be a meaningful purpose, right? Every time we end up attracting people because of higher salaries or better perks or exotic vacations and whatnot, we will quickly become a very weak organization.
Yeah. I think what you're saying is that you have to build for the organization and you have to build the culture based on the mission of the company, and this comes as a part of being a part of the company. I think we talked a lot about your view on team culture, hiring, but I wanted to now step out of just your shoes of running your own firm and talk about a larger sort of point, right? And that point is that the world has changed over the last 2 years, and we are facing a reality now and a reality check in the startup ecosystem as well. And so founders and team members need to start thinking differently from what we thought in India, at least over the last 2 years. So your message to founders in this environment when thinking about building teams, and to teams or people who are working in the startup ecosystem as well, about how to navigate this time.
In what sense?
So let's say, for example, right, I am part of the startup ecosystem and I'm an employee of an organization, and I'm reading all over the place about
the whole
layoffs and not just in India, right? Globally as well. There are people being laid off, etc. All of that. I will feel some sort of nervousness and some sort of fear, right? So how does a founder have to deal with this? Because while the team may not come and tell you this, and even if your organization is safe, it'll be at the back of everyone's mind. And for a person working in the startup ecosystem as well, which was the most exciting, disruptive, fast-growing space for the last 2 years, there are now some inhibitions and some nervousness.
I think I fully agree, first of all. Especially last 2 months, I've been sensing this fear across the ecosystem. We recently went to a campus for hiring. There is a sudden drop in terms of students applying for startup jobs versus corporate jobs. Until last year, startup jobs had consistently become the hottest jobs on campus. In just 2 months, the confidence has shaken, right? So I think it's extremely important. It is there. You are very right. Everybody is looking at the startup ecosystem with a doubt right now. And I think it is only and only founders' responsibility to over-communicate. The answer is, how do you over-communicate to your employees to begin with, and to the world in terms of how capital efficiently you are running your organization and what the cultural values you are living by. These are the very two important points. Now, number one, capital efficiency. There are many business models which consistently invest on growth at any cost, sometimes knowingly as well. It is very important for the founder to come out and acknowledge that, accept it, and explain the reason on why certain decisions
it's being done.
Right? Why it's being done. Because it's not that founders are just doing it irrationally or investors are pushing them, right? In media, I hear a lot usually where the narrative gets created that investors are pushing founders to do layoffs, or founders want to save some money, or shareholders want to save some money, so they are playing with people's lives. But I don't think that's true. I think most of the founders and investors do have a genuine intent. But I think communication sometimes breaks the narrative. So that's very, very important. And number two, as I said, extremely important to share the detailing of your financial strength, your plans to recorrect if you need to, and playing by and explaining your cultural values, right? Why cultural values are important is because a lot of companies are comfortable sometimes to do a little bit of a bloated hiring and then do some sort of a layoff. If culturally companies are comfortable with that, I think people have to know about it. It's ultimately the management's choice in terms of what direction they want to go in, as long as they are doing the layoffs or job cuts in a legal way. But it is, if it's not the right ethical step to take, you still want to be open and transparent about it. It's not that people would not join these companies. People would still join these companies for their growth in variety of ways, or maybe if they believe in the vision of the company, the product of the company, the customers of the company and whatnot. But at least people deserve to know that this is one of the strategies. And I have to consistently be in the game to make sure that if we are in a high burn model or high growth investment model, everybody should be kind of aligned towards making sure that they're trying to build towards capital efficiency as quickly as they can, right? Sometimes employees only get to know at the end of the year that, oh, this is actually the reality. The reality, right? So that's something we keep doing at LogiNext. Coming to the point is, SaaS is a very inherently capital efficient business model, right? Yeah. So we have very high gross margins. Most founders and investors understand what gross margin is, but most employees don't know what gross margins are. We actually consciously take an education or awareness session around gross margins every quarter. So we tell people what ultimately we are optimizing for. The second thing that SaaS businesses have is recurring revenue. We educate people in terms of what truly recurring revenue means, what contracted revenue means, right? So they also know that this kind of customers are
going to stay for
a long time, and they naturally build products and go-to-market strategies around attracting better quality revenue. If this truly comes from the team, and these concepts are not rocket science, just that they are not taught formally.
And they're not told to everybody.
They're not told to everybody in the organization. And the ecosystem also has very little knowledge around or material around, available around this. Only maybe probably financial professionals know. Sure. They also sometimes don't know the practical meaning of this concept. They just know theory about it. So I think that's something we keep doing heavily. Kind of one more thing we do is we also bring in people who generally have a more capital efficient mindset, right? So if people have come from backgrounds where they never had to worry about cost, or they were always in a very high perk environment, crazy salary environments they come from, we actually avoid hiring them. Is because we don't want any of such non-culturally fit kind of or culturally unfit kind of elements to creep into our organization, and that's how we kind of try to preserve it. We understand that this preservation may not be the most scalable approach, but we still keep doing it.
Thank you so much, Dhruvil, for having this conversation. I think it's an important topic that we touched on team culture and hiring in startups, and I think it's not talked about enough. I want to sum up sort of the big learning that I got at the end, and it was over-communicate and make everyone feel like they're part of the ride, right? A simple thing you said about explaining to someone who may be junior in their team about what gross margin and recurring revenue is and how it can actually impact the way they sell and they work on a daily basis is something that I haven't seen so many founders do. So thank you, Dhruvil, for sharing so openly, and I hope everyone learns as much as I did from this conversation.
Thank you for the interesting conversation, Arjun. Thank you for having me.